together can be fun, an event the entire family enjoys and looks forward to. Throughout history, the sharing of food with others has been a token of friendship and goodwill. Friends and relatives gather around the table on holidays and days of celebration. Friends sit together at the school cafeteria table, or families enjoy an evening out at a restaurant, or a meal at home as this family is doing. You can tell by the look on this father's face that he's enjoying this meal. As a matter of fact, he's pretty proud right at the moment because his daughter Jane and his son Jimmy helped make this dinner more fun than almost any he can remember. Mother has a smile on her face too, because she knows why Jane and Jimmy remembered their table manners so well tonight. It was to be a surprise for Daddy. Let's turn back the hands of the clock to 5 o'clock and see what happened. Mother, Jane, and Jimmy were setting the table for dinner, and Jimmy was saying that he wished Daddy could come home from work sooner, so he'd have more time to have fun with the family before dinner. Jane said that about the only time they saw Daddy during the week was when they were eating, because by the time dishes were done after dinner and their homework was finished, it was almost time for bed. Mother agreed that this was a problem, but she said that after all, a simple thing like eating dinner together could be fun too. Now, Jane and Jimmy weren't too sure just what Mother meant. But the more they thought about what she'd said, the more it seemed to make sense. So they decided to make a list of the things they could do to make meals more enjoyable for everyone. Then, when Daddy came home for dinner tonight, they'd surprise him. Jane got some paper and a pencil. Then they both sat down and started making out their list. Jimmy said that eating together is more fun if everyone comes to the table as soon as he's called, or even better, help bring the food in from the kitchen. Jane wrote this down on the list. Then Jane said everyone should be clean, so they wrote, "Wash your hands and face before the meal." And their list grew and grew as first Jimmy would think of one thing, then Jane would think of another. Mother came in from the kitchen just as they were finishing the list. Mother said she thought they had a wonderful idea, and she knew Daddy would be very pleased and very surprised too. As Mother looked over the list, she noticed that almost everything on the list called for better table manners, and Mother said that was right. Eating dinner is more fun when everyone remembers his table manners. But she reminded them that remembering was the hardest part. We know what to do, she said, but we forget sometimes unless we make good table manners a habit. Jane and Jimmy said they weren't going to forget tonight. They wanted to surprise Daddy. About that time, they heard a car door slam. Daddy was home. Jane and Jimmy hid the paper and pencil in the desk so that Daddy wouldn't know about the surprise. When Daddy came in, he didn't suspect a thing. But he was hungry and ready for dinner. Yes, sir, that food in the kitchen really smelled good. Jane and Jimmy were ready for dinner too. In fact, they could hardly wait. Jimmy said he guessed they'd better get their hands and faces washed so they'd be ready to come to the table when Mother called them. And away they went to clean up. Daddy said that Jane and Jimmy seemed so eager for dinner to start, they must be pretty hungry tonight. But Mother didn't tell the secret. So Daddy went to wash his hands and face too. When Mother said dinner was ready, Jane and Jimmy hurried to the table and stood by their chairs. Their hands and faces were washed, and they were ready to sit down at the same time as Mother and Daddy. As Daddy gave thanks, Jimmy bowed his head and was very quiet, because this was the way his family gave thanks for their food. Then Daddy started serving the food. When he asked Jane if she'd like a larger helping of potatoes, she said, "Yes, please." So far, Jane and Jimmy had remembered everything on their list. Jimmy sat up straight in his chair. He didn't slouch against the back of the chair or lean on the table. He didn't play with his food or with his silverware. He paid attention to what he was doing. Jane, too, was paying attention. When Mother needed some butter, Jane said, "Would you like some butter, Mother?" And Mother said, "Yes, she would, thank you." Before Jane passed the butter, she was careful to put her silverware down. She put her knife and fork on the plate. She didn't lean them against the side of the plate, as oars on a boat. Jimmy said he would like some butter too, please, and Mother passed the butter on to him. Daddy was very pleased at the way both Jane and Jimmy remembered their table manners. Not once had he had to remind them of anything. Instead, he just relaxed and asked Jimmy what he had done at school today. Jane wanted to tell Daddy about school too, but she waited for her turn in the conversation. She finished chewing her food so her mouth wouldn't be full when it was her time to talk. When Jimmy finished telling Daddy his story, Daddy asked Jane what she had been doing all day. All through the rest of the meal, Jane and Jimmy remembered their table manners, and Daddy was pleased. In fact, he said he couldn't remember when he'd enjoyed a dinner more than this one. He'd noticed how well Jane and Jimmy had done. He said he was certainly proud of Jane and Jimmy. Well, that was when Jane, Jimmy, and Mother decided to let Daddy in on the secret. Jane asked to be excused from the table and went to the desk. She got the list from the drawer of the desk and took it to Daddy. Then they explained all about their surprise. Daddy read through the list and said, "Well, now let's go back and see if you did everything on your list. Be clean. Wash hands and face before meals, so you'll be ready on time. Come to the table right away when called, or better, be there to help before called." Daddy remembered that Jane and Jimmy both washed their hands and face before dinner, and they had come to the table right away when Mother said that dinner was ready. Next on the list was, be polite, say please and thank you. Jane and Jimmy had both been very polite. Daddy remembered, for example, how Jane had said please when Daddy asked her if she wanted more potatoes, and how she had said thank you when he passed her plate to her. Sit up straight. Don't lean on table or back against the chair. Jimmy had done that all right. He'd sat up straight and paid attention to what he was doing, and he didn't play with his food or silverware either. Wait your turn to talk. Don't talk with your mouth full. Yes, Jane and Jimmy had waited their turns in the conversation. While Jimmy was telling Daddy what happened at school today, Jane had finished chewing her food, so she'd be ready to talk when her turn came. Pass things to each other and ask for things instead of reaching. See what your neighbor needs and pass it to him. Daddy was especially proud of the way Jane noticed that Mother needed butter and passed it to her before Mother had to ask for it. Place silverware on the plate when not using it. Both Jane and Jimmy had been careful not to put their silverware on the tablecloth where it would leave stains. Stay at the table until excused. Jane had excused herself from the table and received permission to go before she went to the desk to get the list to show Daddy. So Daddy said it looked as if they'd done everything on their list. They'd remembered all their table manners. He was certainly pleased. As Daddy was congratulating them and saying how proud he was of them, Jane and Jimmy remembered that Daddy had forgotten to read the last thing on their list. It was on the other side of the page. Eating together is more fun if we all remember our table manners. They all laughed when Daddy said, "Yes, sir, I sure agree with this."